So this is our fifth lesson, our fifth lecture on an introduction, an overview, introduction of the Hanafi madhab, as well as a look at some of the developments, evolution. Last session we spent a short time looking at the life and times of Imam Abu Hanifa, and we said that we briefly looked at his teacher, his main teacher, and today what we're going to look at is what we're going to have our sessions divided into the following three topics. So the first section will be on the books that have been ascribed to Imam Abu Hanifa, and then the second session will be looking at Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, or Imam Yusuf first and Imam Muhammad, and then Imam Muhammad section will be looking at the books of Imam Muhammad, and this will nicely get us into the following lecture, where we look at the Taqsimul Masail in the Hanafi madhab, which is known as Zahiri wa Nawadir, and the Fatawa of the Mashayikh, inshallah. So the first aspect we'll be looking at today will be the books of Imam Abu Hanifa, and this is an important topic, because when it comes to this early phase in the era of the Sahaba, Tabi'een and Atba Tabi'een, because when looking at the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, we realize that he was from the Sighar Tabi'een, the young Tabi'een. This is something which has been generally accepted, although there were some scholars like Imam al-Darqutni who questioned the Tabi'iyyah of Imam Abu Hanifa, but there have been narrations that have been cited by the likes of Ibn Hajar, which do affirm the Tabi'iyyah that Imam Abu Hanifa was a Tabi'i. And so this, even though it's not established that he narrated any hadith from the Sahaba, but that he met while he saw some Sahaba, is something which most scholars affirm. So that being the case, we would say Tabi'een, but the era that Imam Abu Hanifa was kind of in was this era of Atba Tabi'een. So technically a Tabi'i era of the Atba Tabi'een. So those are the things that we'll be looking at. In that era, rather, the idea of books, the writing of books, etc., was something that was not as common a phenomena, due to the rarity of paper, pen, and even the notion of having a book being written was not as common a phenomena. So this is what we'll be looking at, inshallah, in the next segment. Now, when it comes to the books of Imam Abu Hanifa, there are 5 main works which are generally related to the topic of Aqidah, which are attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa. They are the Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, the Fiqh al-Absat, the Wasiyya, the Kitab Alim Muta'allim, and the Risala ila Uthman al-Batti. These are the 5 rasail that are attributed back to Imam Abu Hanifa. Ulrich Rudolph has written a work published by Brill, on Imam Maturidi, but he has a section where he describes the ascription of these works, or at least the Fiqh al-Akbar, or is known as Fiqh al-Absat, the Kitab Alim Muta'allim, and the Risala to Imam Abu Hanifa. He discusses that in quite some detail, so you can look at more information there. And the Fiqh al-Akbar has been discussed in a recent article by Professor Dr. Ibrahim Harvey, on the ascription of that work to Imam Abu Hanifa. And the Wasiyya has been discussed in the introduction very briefly by Sheikh Hamza Bakri to the Sharh of the Wasiyya of Babarti. Very brief discussion is there. So I'm going to give you a summary of what some scholars have said and my take on these, inshallah. The first we will talk about is the Fiqh al-Akbar and the Fiqh al-Absat. Now, the term Fiqh al-Akbar, there's 2 books with the name Fiqh al-Akbar that are ascribed to Imam Abu Hanifa. These are 2 separate books. For purpose of ease, they were entitled with two different titles. So one became known as Fiqh al-Absat and the other one became known as Fiqh al-Akbar. Whereas in reality, both are called Fiqh al-Akbar, but they're two separate books ascribed back to Imam Abu Hanifa. So on one side, which is known as the Fiqh al-Absat, so we're going to stick to that name just for clarity, or we can just say Fiqh al-Akbar bi-riwayat Abi Mati al-Balkhi. So you have Fiqh al-Absat, also known as Fiqh al-Akbar, transmitted via Abu Mati al-Balkhi. And then you have Fiqh al-Akbar, right, which has been claimed to have been transmitted by Hammad bin Abi Hanifa. Okay, so riwayat Hammad, Fiqh al-Akbar, Fiqh al-Akbar riwayat Abi Mati' or just Fiqh al-Absat. Now, when it comes to the Fiqh al-Absat or Abu Mati' al-Balkhi, then there is numerous evidences for the authenticity of this work back to Abu Mati' al-Balkhi. Many early scholars have affirmed this attribution. The question then comes is that Abu Mati' al-Balkhi, is he in essence writing or just transmitting the work of Imam Abu Hanifa, or is this Abu Mati' al-Balkhi's own work which is taken or inspired by Imam Abu Hanifa? Right, so that's where some scholars have ascribed this book back to Abu Mati' al-Balkhi, and some ascribe to Imam Abu Hanifa. Abu Mati' al-Balkhi, under the lens of the muhaddithin, is deemed as a questionable narrator. There's a numerous jarh done on Abu Mati' al-Balkhi. So through the strict lens of jarh wa ta'deel, even if you were to assume a ascribed back to Abu Hanifa, there'll be a question in whether Abu Mati' al-Balkhi is authentic transmitter or not. But regardless of that, the early Hanafis like Abu Layth al-Samarqandi accepted this book and actually wrote a commentary on it. So there's a sharh of Fiqh al-Akbar by Abu Layth al-Samarqandi, which has some scholars have misattributed back to Imam al-Maturidi. This is actually by Abu Layth al-Samarqandi. So that's the Fiqh al-Absat bi-riwayat, or Fiqh al-Akbar bi-riwayat Abu Mati', also known as Fiqh al-Absat. The Fiqh al-Akbar, which is more popular now, so this Fiqh al-Absat is something that's not really studied in Madaris, right? Not that I'm aware of. Whereas on the other side, when you have Fiqh al-Akbar, which has been translated in English by Mufti Abdul Rahman Mangera, there's also there's a famous commentary by Mullah Liqari, right, and a few other later scholars have wrote commentaries on it. This was placed in a number of syllabuses. Had this as part of the Aqidah document to read. So this is there's also a recent commentary out on it by Nidal al-Rashi, which is called Al-Badr al-Anwar. So this is the famous Fiqh al-Akbar in terms of what has been studied or what is known or what is quoted. It was off-quoted. So this Fiqh al-Akbar, in its ascription back to Imam Abu Hanifa, there have been great debate and numerous so the paper by Dr. Ibrahim Muhavi that was written recently has argued that the Fiqh al-Akbar Riwayat Hammad is not a book of Imam Abu Hanifa at all, and the main reason for this is the fact that this was completely unknown in the first few centuries of after the demise of Imam Abu Hanifa. No one cites it, no one mentions it. Rather, all mentions of the Fiqh al-Akbar in that early era are to the riwayat of Abu Mati' al-Balkhi. So the fact that you have this very elaborate text that highlights numerous aspects of Aqidah and that no one's mentioning it, right? That shows that's and no Hanafis are writing commentaries of it. No person is citing from it anywhere. So the fact that the absence of that, he says, is a clear evidence that this was a later text, and the reason where the confusion emanated from was that it had the same name as the other Fiqh al-Akbar. So people started to assume that was the same text, right? Or it was that text. So the ones that earlier scholars have mentioned, this is that text, and then that became popularized amongst people, and then this is why this became known attribution to Imam Abu Hanifa. And I do think there's more to discuss about the sanad of the kitab, etc. as well, but I do think that's a relatively compelling case for the inauthenticity of the attribution of this work back to Imam Abu Hanifa. We can go into much more detail, but we don't have the time for that. As for the wasiyya, then similarly it's been questioned in terms of authenticity back to Imam Abu Hanifa. I've not looked into as much detail, but I have seen that there's good reason to question it. The Risala of Uthman al-Batti back to Imam Abu Hanifa, attribution of that seems to be authentic. Right, Rudolph has argued for the authenticity of this in his book, and I think he makes a compelling case for the authenticity of the letter. And that letter talks a lot about the topic of irja, right? And then the Kitab Alim Muta'allim, which is transmitted by Abu Muqaddar al-Samarqandi. There's also a good reason for the authenticity of this. Again, whether it was actually written by Abu Hanifa seems to be not the case. It seems to be Abu Muqaddar al-Samarqandi paraphrasing his engagement with Imam Abu Hanifa. And there's actually a commentary of this Kitab Alim Muta'allim by Ibn Furak, which is relatively early, which kind of demonstrates the fact that this book was known. So these are the 5 books of Imam Abu Hanifa, attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa, the content of which have generally been accepted. That's why we have Allama Bayadi in his Isharat al-Maram. He summarizes the content of these 5 risalas. Right, so these 5, he kind of puts them in and he writes commentaries on them. That's Isharat al-Maram by Allama Bayadi, which is a very famous Maturidi text. It kind of summarizes the content of these, not summarizes, takes from the content of these 5 risail. That's so that's on the Aqidah Rasail. In terms of fiqh, there is nothing that has been transmitted in terms of the writings of Imam Abu Hanifa. So of course his fiqh has been transmitted, but whether he wrote a book on fiqh, that's not been transmitted. But there is the Kitab al-Athar. The Kitab al-Athar, which has been transmitted by Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan Shaybani and Imam Abu Yusuf. They have Kitab al-Athar, in which are the bulk of which is the transmissions of Imam Abu Hanifa. And there's also been a mention that Imam Zufar had a Kitab al-Athar, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Imam Hassan Ziyad also had a Kitab al-Athar. If this is to be accepted, then scholars like Abu al-Wafa al-Afghani have argued that the Kitab al-Athar seems to be actually a book of Imam Abu Hanifa, and what Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad and the rest have are transmissions of that book. Right? And he tries to make a comparison with that and the Muwatta Imam Malik. Just like the Muwatta Imam Malik, you have Malik's transmission of the written text, and then you have various transmissions of it that differ slightly from amongst each other. Then similarly, the Kitab al-Athar should be ascribed back to Imam Abu Hanifa. On the other hand, most of the Muhaddithin do not ascribe the Kitab al-Athar as a book written by Abu Hanifa himself. Rather, it just seems to be his transmissions, which were then taken by a students and organized into chapters. So it's not actually his book and strict transmission. It's actually just his hadith, like any other scholar who has hadith and people transmit. It's not necessarily that he wrote a book that was being made, that he was transmitting. What constitutes a book as well as another debate. But that's where, so in summary, when we look back at the works of Imam Abu Hanifa, then even though the Risala, which is a letter, is not really a book that he wrote, that's authentic. And you have other of these books like the Fiqh al-Absat and the Kitab Alim Muta'allim, which we can argue have a fair rendition of the belief of Imam Hanifa, though it may not be written by him, and the Fiqh al-Akbar and the Wasiyya, that even though it can't be ascribed to Imam Hanifa, the content itself is in line with Maturidi creed, so therefore the content is not considered as being problematic, but using that to ascribe anything back to Imam Hanifa will be questionable. The Kitab al-Athar, even though it may not be the book of Imam Hanifa in the strict sense, but the narrations of Imam Hanifa are there, and even some of his comments, as Imam Muhammad would preserve, saying after citing a hadith, he goes, وَبِهِ نَأْخُذ, this is what we take, or وَهَذَا قَوْلَ بِحَنِيفَ. So there, the positions of Imam Hanifa and his relationship with certain hadith is highlighted. So that's a summary of the books of Imam Hanifa, or books ascribed to Imam Hanifa. There's others which some scholars have mentioned, but they don't really, there's no real trace of them to actually kind of see what they were about. We can now move on to, inshallah, the influence, or briefly, the influence of the 2 students of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. In the work Al-Madhab al-Hanafi by Ahmed Naqib, he has an interesting or very useful section which is entitled Atharul Imam Abu Yusuf, from page 106, and that's what we'll be reading from right now. He writes, he goes, Al-Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah min kibari ashab al-Imam Abi Hanifa alladhina lazamuhu hatta wafatihi. كان يصنف المسائل في مجلس درسه ثم يعرضها عليه، وقد سبق ما كان من حرص الجانبين على الحضور والملازمة، وما قال إمام أبو يوسف أبو حنيفة رحمه الله عنه ما لزمني أحد مثل ما لزمني أبو يوسف وهو أجمع أصحاب العلم. So Imam Abu Yusuf is from the senior, or from the senior students of Imam Abu Hanifa, and he spent time with him until he passed away. So I mean, he did suhbah of him until Imam Abu Hanifa passed away, and he will write masail during the dars. Then he will present them to Imam Abu Hanifa. It's already preceded. And he talks this before about Imam Abu Yusuf's relationship with Imam Abu Hanifa, the way he would partake and the way Imam Abu Hanifa would teach him and the way he showed him such respect despite his being a student. That's already passed by. We don't have time to go through all those stories, but there's a lot of incidences which I mentioned, which are really help us understand how and why these figures kind of latched themselves onto Imam Abu Hanifa despite other great Imams being accessible to them. And actually Imam Abu Yusuf would actually explain that he would go to Ibn Abi Layla, his majalis, and then he would go to his issue was Ibn Abi Layla's majlis, and then he shifted to Imam Abu Hanifa, and he explains the shift as well of why he makes that shift. And you see a running theme is that Imam Abu Hanifa will not back away from the subtleties. Right, so when it comes to a hadith or anything or any mas'ala, the subtleties in which Imam Hanifa would attach, would expose, and the complicated things where he would unravel for his students and make them think, was something that was unprecedented, and they couldn't find anyone that would match Imam Abu Hanifa in that, even if these other scholars may have narrated or memorized thousands of hadith. And that is what kind of gravitated a whole host of great scholars to Imam Abu Hanifa, and even after him passing away. So the story of Imam Tahawi is a similar one of the incidents, stories about why he went to the Hanafi madhab. One is to do with that, is the fact that he saw certain masail that they would be discussing and the way they will approach it not found in the other madhabs. And so Imam Abu Hanifa kind of accepts and says that no one has held on to me or stuck with me the way that Imam Abu Yusuf has. He's the one who is the most comprehensive in knowledge, and that's why his praise again from the muhaddithin was he was considered as being one of the most knowledgeable of hadith from the scholars of Ra'i. Right, so Ahlul Hadith, Ahlul Ra'i, the distinction. Ahlul Ra'i, Imam Abu Yusuf was considered to be one of the most knowledgeable, even amongst the this is not from the book, I'm mentioning myself, from as given by the muhaddithin even. So the first way, or the ways in which he helped to spread the madhab, is he highlights Shaykh Ahmed Naqib through three ways. Is through tadris, qada, and tadween. Right, tadris, qada, and tadween. Tadris is teaching. So he first mentioned, he goes that by teaching, Imam Abu Hanifa established the principles of his madhab, وَرَبَّ جِيلًا مُتَمَيِّزًا مِنَ الْفُقَهَاء, and he formulated or made this great generation of scholars, of jurists. وَكَانَ مِنْ أَثَرْ مَا سَلَفَ ذِكْرُهُ فِي الْمَوْعِظَةِ. And so the impact of that, and again we've skipped this section because we don't have time for it, of how Imam Abu Hanifa would teach, you see the athar of that. So that's why after his Imam Abu Hanifa passed away, you will see that his companions respected that method of teaching and time spent upon them, and that is what kind of allowed them to continue that method. He goes, والإمام يوسف رحمه الله الذي بلغ النضج العلم في حياة شيخه وشارك مدرسة المسائل ووضع الأصول تولى هذه المهمة بعد وفاته. So Imam Yusuf, because he had peaked, if you like, or reached the pinnacle of knowledge during the lifetime of Abu Hanifa, because by the end of Imam Hanifa's life, he would engage with him as contemporary, as equals. He goes, so when Imam Hanifa passes away, he takes on that method and carries on. So for Darasa alayhi, so the likes of Muhammad Hassan Shaybani, Hassan bin Ziyad, who actually students Abu Hanifa as well, they start to learn from Abu Yusuf. وعدد كبير من أخذوا عنه فقه وفقه شيخه. So the number of scholars will come to learn from Abu Yusuf, and because Abu Hanifa has passed away, you can learn about Abu Hanifa as well from Abu Yusuf. So then they took from Abu Yusuf and they went and they spread the madhab. And from those who took ومن أخذ عنه من أهل الآفاق سبق أن نقل مذهب الحنفي نشره في بلده على سبيل المثال. So examples of people that took from Abu Yusuf and they went to spread the madhab and his opinions in other places are the likes of Al-Husayn ibn Hafs al-Asbahani, who learned fiqh on Abu Yusuf, and then he would transmit the madhab Abu Hanifa in Asbahan, and he gave fatwa on it there as well. You have Muhammad Khalid al-Handali, who learned from Abu Yusuf, then he spent time at Astrabad and he narrated hadith there. He was the first person to teach fiqh upon the madhab Abu Hanifa there. So you see how this happens is by the teaching of Abu Yusuf, these people come out as scholars, they go back to their cities and then they teach the fiqh of Abu Hanifa, but they learned that based on Abu Yusuf. So the madhab is spread via Abu Yusuf via tadris. The second, which is probably the most famous, is qada, right? Is the via the way of being a judge. So Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah became the chief judge of the Abbasid Empire for a number of years. So it wasn't a short period. For a number of years he was the chief judge, and rather that was until he passed away. فكان إليه تولية القضاء بمشرق المغرب, and he was actually given by the Khalifa the choice of who to choose as the Qadi. So if there's going to be a Qadi in a given city, right, or town, you have to go through Abu Yusuf. ولا يعين القاضي في الدولة على اتصال رقعته إلا بمشورته وموافقته. That no one was given the judge or the role of being a judge except after consultation with Abu Yusuf. So he would give numerous of his own students, or those who were Hanafis, they agreed with the role of being a judge. It's not 100%. Right? This is something which Ahmed Shamsi highlights. It's not that every post was just a Hanafi. There are examples of non-Hanafis being given roles of judges, but a significant number of Hanafis were allowed to flourish because it goes through Abu Yusuf. So it goes, this helped the spread of the Hanafi madhab via the state. Right? So we talk about state enforced spread of the madhab, but someone can argue that this is because of the state that the Hanafi madhab spread. But as I mentioned to you in the first session of the second session, is that is true, but then the question is, why was Abu Yusuf given that status? Why was he made the chief judge? There had to be something in him that allowed him to flourish to that degree. And this is why I said that the teaching and the fiqh of Abu Hanifa has a major role, which allows the state to adopt it. Right? The notion that it was just if it was anyone at that time, that method would have spread, it doesn't do justice to the imam behind it. So both play a role. Right? So emphasizing one over the other is unfair. To not give the political consideration any weight is wrong, and to not give the fiqh of Abu Hanifa and his genius and his method of teaching and how he spread, how he made this jurist a factor as well, is also wrong. Both need to be given its due diligence, and it's all fully referenced there. He cites this fact from this last point about the spread of the madhab by Abu Yusuf via Jawan al-Mudiyya al-Qurashi, Taj Tarajim ibn Qutubugha, and other such books. And a more recent work that he's citing is Muhadarat fi Tarikh al-Madahib by Abu Zahra. Sheikh Abu Zahra, he also discusses this in more detail about how Abu Yusuf, how the madhab spread via him. And the third process of Abu Yusuf, his role that he played was at-tadween, which is the formulation of the madhab. So he goes, Imam Abu Yusuf wrote Yusannif Masail fi Majlisi Dars Imam, as you mentioned before, during the Dars of Abu Hanifa, he will write down the Masail. وكان ذلك بمثابة النواة الأولى لما قام به فيما بعد من تأليف عدد من الكتب القيمة. So this was the seed for him to, the nucleus for him to start to write books after the demise of Abu Hanifa. So a lot of his own position, the position of Abu Hanifa, are mentioned within these books, which allow his position, the fiqh of Abu Hanifa to become stabilized. Because we talk about tadween, and we'll talk about tadween in this more elaborate stage, but in this initial form of tadween, which is that the sheikh is giving dars, but it has to be some sort of making this or recording this in a formulated way. So this is where the students are required to write those notes, so they become that they are able to be preserved. right? Rather than this more loose way. If you can imagine a fiqh dars, the fiqh dars would have quite a lot of looseness to it, like opinions change, debate, argue. But when you start writing them down, it gets a bit more consistency to it, and it becomes more solid. So that's the first stage of tadween that Imam Abu Yusuf started in the lifetime of Abu Hanifa. And after him, he wrote numerous books. From the books that he wrote are, as you mentioned before, the Kitab al-Athar, which Imam Abu Yusuf put into pen the narrations of Imam Abu Hanifa. And we also have some risalas of shorter works of Imam Abu Yusuf, such as the Al-Ikhtilaf Bayna Abi Hanifa Ibn Abi Layla, right, which is the differences between Ibn Abi Layla and Abu Hanifa written down. Al-Rad al-Sir Awza'i, which is a refutation of Imam Awza'i on his the Masail of Sir, which is to do international war. Or international law, where he cites the position of Awza'i and Abu Hanifa's, and then he usually prefers Abu Hanifa's position. So this way, engaging with other madhahib or other opinions, other individuals, and more or less supporting. Of course, he's not an absolute muqallid of Abu Hanifa. You seem to disagree with him, but generally speaking, fighting the cause of Abu Hanifa against other opponents, or opponents in the sense of other scholars. So that way, really solidifying the case of the Hanafi madhab. So via his books, you find that Imam Abu Yusuf has a great impact. So there's a stage impact on Abu Yusuf: tadris, teaching; qada, via him being the chief judge; and number 3, books, which is formulates the early stage of tadween. Okay, so that's the athar of Imam Abu Yusuf. And then in the next segment, we'll look at the athar of Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. Okay, so now we can move on to Imam Muhammad. Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani only spent a short amount of time with Imam Abu Hanifa. He learned the bulk of the madhab via Imam Abu Yusuf. And one thing I forgot to mention, and I'll cite here, is that in terms of biographies of these individuals, probably the most famous biography written in contemporary times was the biography of Imam Zahid al-Kawthari. He's got a biography of Imam Abu Yusuf, which is called Husn al-Taqadi, fi Sirat Imam Abu Yusuf al-Qadi. And then he's also got a biography of Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani. If you're going to purchase these books, they're available online. If you're going to purchase these books, then there's a new edition by Darul Fath, published a few years ago, with the footnotes of Sheikh Hamza Bakri. This is very useful. So if you're going to purchase a book, make sure you purchase, or if you're going to read it, I would advise you to purchase this, the more recent Darul Fath copy. There's very useful footnotes, and it's typed out. It's much more easier to accessible. These are much more detailed biographies of these individuals, and Imam al-Kawthari discusses a whole host of other topics alongside the stuff that we are briefly touching upon. Right, because we have limited time in what we're discussing, therefore external reading that I'm mentioning, make sure to note them down and do them. Otherwise, we can only, we're talking about 1,000-year history that we're trying to cover in half an hour, 45-minute segments, 15 or so segments. So it's an impossible task. So if you're not going to be doing the other reading, you can't really expect to gain any real depth beyond the few comments that I make and allusions that I allude to. Okay, so now we can move on to the impact of Imam Muhammad. Now, Imam Muhammad's impact, as anyone who would have read anything about the madhab before, is probably much more larger of an impact in terms of the tadween of the madhab. So in terms of the masail of the madhab, right, so the formulation of masail and preservation of Abu Hanifa's fiqh, right, Imam Muhammad has a far greater role than Imam Abu Yusuf. But in terms of, as you mentioned, the political spread and the initial transmission of after Imam Abu Hanifa's demise, then Imam Abu Yusuf has a larger impact. So they both, play a pivotal role in the spread of the madhab. So the first thing that Shaykh Ahmed Naqi mentions regarding the impact of Imam Muhammad on the madhab is tadween. And he says here, he goes, من أهم الأعمال التي نهض بها الإمام محمد الحسن رحمه الله أنه قام بدواية فقه شيخيه أبي حنيفة وأبي يوسف رحمه الله وأضاف إليه فروعا كثيرة أخرى ثم دونها في مؤلفاته القيمة التي عرفت في مذهب الحنفي كتب الظاهر رواية. That from the most important thing or practices that was done by Imam Muhammad, was that he transmitted the fiqh of his two sheikhs, Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf. And he, alongside that, attached numerous other peripheral masail. Then organized them into very important books, which are known in the Hanafi madhab as the books of Zahiri Riwayah. The books of Zahiri Riwayah, which is going to be our following lesson. We'll go into more detail of this. Here he cites the Zahiri Riwayah as being Jami' al-Kabir, al-Ziyadat, al-Sir al-Saghir, al-Sir al-Kabir, al-Mabsut. Right, so al-Jami' al-Saghir, al-Jami' al-Kabir, Ziyadat, al-Sir al-Saghir, al-Sir al-Kabir, al-Mabsut, which are known as the 6 books of Zahiri Riwayah. We will discuss the accuracy of this claim in the next, briefly in the next class, inshallah. وَهِيَ عُمْدَةُ الْمَذْهَبِ الْحَنَفِي. This is the base of the Hanafi madhab. So Zahiri Riwayah, for those who are not aware, is the core of the Hanafi madhab. So like in the, you can say, in the Shafi'i madhab, you may have like Kitab al-Umm, which is the Masail of Imam Muhammad. This is, Imam Shafi'i. That's his own book, his own Masail is highlighted. Or you can have the Muwatta or the Mudawwana of Sahnun in the Maliki madhab. Or in the Hanbali madhab, you have the Masail, or the Su'alat, the questions asked towards Imam Ahmed by his students, which are preserved. These are the foundation of the these madhahib. So likewise, when it comes to the Hanafi madhab, the foundation of the Hanafi madhab is what is known as the Zahiri Riwayah, which is the books of Imam Muhammad. Right, and all these other books that come after these mukhtasars, etc., that come in the madhab, or even stuff like Hidayah, which are commentaries on these mukhtasars, they will all go back to the Zahiri Riwayah, which formulate the core of the Hanafi madhab. You can't discuss the Hanafi madhab without being aware of Zahiri Riwayah and what that is. Now, as we'll see in the next lesson, a lot of these books are now accessible, which were not for many centuries, but we'll discuss the impact of that after, inshallah. So he says, وله غيره من المؤلفات ككتاب الآثار الأمال الحجة على أهل المدينة وزيادات زيادة وغيرها كثير. But he's got other books as well. Now the reason why they're called Zahiri, we'll discuss as well, but other books like the Kitab al-Athar. Now the Kitab al-Athar of Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, if you do a comparison between them, you will see that the Kitab al-Athar of Imam Abu Yusuf has far less, I would say, not benefits, a bad word, but Imam Abu Yusuf's Kitab al-Athar is far more just located on the focused in. Yeah, sorry, I had to pause for a second. So the Kitab al-Athar of Imam Abu Yusuf is focused heavily on just transmitting the Athar. The Kitab al-Athar of Imam Muhammad, it has the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf highlighted therein as well. So when you have an Athar in Kitab al-Athar of Abu Yusuf, then the Kitab, he will just mention it and we'll leave it at that. And you'll see the significance of this, some of the Masail that we will look at in case studies. And if you look at the Kitab al-Athar of Imam Abu Yusuf, so Imam Muhammad, then under each Athar, you usually have the opinion of Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Yusuf highlighted. Another aspect of his is for example, his transmission of the Muwatta Imam Malik. When Imam Muhammad transmits the Muwatta Imam Malik, he not only adds narrations in of Imam Abu Hanifa or the scholars of Kufa that support his madhab, then he also highlights the opinions of Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Abu Hanifa within after each had his own opinion after each chapter as well. Well, in essence, basically, just being like a rendition, a Hanafi rendition of the Muwatta Imam Malik. And then also you have his Al-Hujjah ala Ahl al-Madinah, which is his book where he writes a response to some of the Masail of the scholars of Medina, mainly the Maliki madhab, and it's a book based upon hadith and athar, so evidence based, using athar to refute the position of the Ahl Medina. So in that sense, Imam Muhammad's contribution, these are just the available books. There's of course other things that have been ascribed to him or that he's written or transmitted, or there are masail transmitted which other students have preserved. So they are preserved, meaning in the books of fiqh, but the original books may not be preserved. So these are each of these works are extremely important, have a great impact in the doing of the tadween of the madhab. So when it comes to tadween, Imam Muhammad's impact is far more than the impact of Imam Abu Yusuf. But when it comes to qada and the spread politically, Imam Abu Yusuf makes more of an impact than Imam Muhammad. Now we already mentioned the Muwatta Imam Malik. and what Imam Muhammad does with that. So it shows you that he was also benefiting from the fiqh of Imam Malik. Alright, so this also makes the Hanafi madhab more appealing. The fact that one of the great founding fathers of Hanafi madhab is someone who's directly studied with the founding father of another madhab, which is Imam Malik. So after the demise of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad then travels over, after studying Abu Yusuf, travels over to Medina, and he receives the fiqh of Ahl Hijaz, and he attaches that to the fiqh of the Iraqi fiqh of Abu Hanifa. And he spent some time with Malik, and during that time he took from him fiqh and hadith. He heard the Muwatta, he transmits the Muwatta, and his transmission is very well known and accepted. Imam Shafi'i said, قال محمد حسن أقمت على باب مالك 3 سنين وكسرى وكان يقول إنه سمع منه اللفظ أكثر من 700 حديث وقال وكان إذا حدثهم عن مالك امتلأ منزله وكثر الناس عليه حتى يضيق عليه موضع وإذا حدثهم عن غير مالك لم يجبه إلا القليل من الناس. So Imam Shafi'i mentions that Imam Muhammad said, because Imam Shafi'i had munaqasha, discussion with Imam Muhammad. There is a debate whether you can consider Imam Shafi'i a student of Imam Muhammad or not, or whether contemporaries. Whatever the case, they did meet and they did engage in discussion. Some of the discussions are mentioned in the Kitab al-Umm of Shafi'i. So Imam Muhammad said, he goes, I spent at the door of Malik 3 or more years. And he would say that he heard from him directly more than 700 hadith. And he would say that when he narrated to them, so later Imam Muhammad would say that when I would narrate to people the hadith of Malik, everyone would gather. And it was for anyone else, they didn't. Which kind of shows you the rank of Imam Malik, and also shows you, potentially alluding to the fact that the scholars of Ra'yi, which we'll discuss in more detail, they were not respected as much amongst the scholars of hadith than what they deserved. But we'll discuss this distinction after. The third, so that's the first impact, or the first way was the fact that he codified the madhab. Number 2 is that he studied with Malik as well. So therefore his presentation of the madhab will be far more nuanced and accurate, right? Because Imam Yusuf was engaging with Awza'i and Ibn Abi Layla. Awza'i and Ibn Abi Layla's madhabs died out eventually, right? Whereas Imam Muhammad's engagement with the Maliki madhab is far more powerful because of the Maliki madhab remains. And so the third method, of course, is tadris, right, which is teaching. So alongside that, Imam Muhammad would teach, and that was the way of the majority of ulama in how to benefit, was by teaching. And it's considered the best way to impart knowledge. And I've already mentioned that he would have a majlis for, he cites this before, was that Imam Muhammad would have a majlis in which he would narrate hadith. Khatib narrates with his son back to Ismail Muhammad. He said, كان محمد حسن له مجلس في الكوفة وهو ابن 20 سنة. So Imam Muhammad started teaching at the age of 20. That's when he had his own majlis. And so you can imagine that because of the sheer amount of years that he was teaching, that the spreading of the madhab would have had a major impact on the spreading of the madhab via that. From those who had studied with him and attained his dars and narrated his books are the likes of Abu Sulaiman Juzajani, you have Hisham ibn Abdullah al-Razi and Mu'alla ibn Mansur al-Razi. Mu'alla Mansur al-Razi is a very famous scholar. We'll be discussing him in the next lecture. Abu Hafs, Abu Ma'bad ibn Isa ibn Aban, ibn Sama'a, and others. Right? And number 4, he was also a qadi as well. So not the chief judge, but he was a qadi. So Imam Muhammad became the qadi in the era of Harun Rashid, such that he sought to be the qadi of Raqqa in the lifetime of Abu Yusuf. Then he became the ثم أصبح القاضي الأول للدولة. Then he became the first قاضي of the state. وقد كان هذه الولاية دراسة أخرى أفادته علما وتجربة وقربت فقهه من الناحية العلمية. Here Ahmed Naqib, he quotes from Abu Zahra's biography of Abu Hanifa, where he goes that becoming a qadi, it allows a person to become much more people savvy, right? It gives you more experience, etc. So therefore, because you're engaging with the general public, when you're doing in a majlis of just teaching fiqh, then it's much more, it's more elitist conversation. Whereas you become a qadi, you're much more engaging with the public. So therefore, it actually matures the person and makes their approach to fiqh much more. So the fact that Imam Muhammad goes through all these kind of processes, and Abu Yusuf, and they're all great imams in their own right, them two and their impact together has a huge impact on the spread of the Hanafi madhab. And they too are not just, lucky. Imam Hanifa got lucky with two students is the fact that they were from the tarbiyah of Imam Abu Hanifa, and his makeup of how to teach, etc., was encoded within these people. And Imam Muhammad then, of course, had a few lesser years, but they took that from Abu Yusuf, and then they spent their life studying, teaching the madhab, and always keeping the teacher, Imam Abu Hanifa, close at heart, and his opinions always at the forefront in any given conversation. So that kind of concludes the athar of Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad on the madhab. So wrapping up this lesson, inshallah, we've looked at the first segment, the books of Imam Abu Hanifa, and we mentioned that the books that are ascribed to him in Aqidah, is hard to say whether he actually wrote them himself, except for the letter they wrote to Uthman al-Batti. The confusion in Fiqh al-Akbar and Fiqh al-Absat that has led to a lot of people ascribing the more famous Fiqh al-Akbar back to Abu Hanifa, and I said that the stronger case, I would say, is that this book is not Imam Abu Hanifa's. As for Fiqh al-Absat, this is a riwayah of Abu Muti al-Balkhi. Then there's reason to believe that it is Abu Muti al-Balkhi's work, and there's nothing to suggest that he's inaccurate in what he transmits from Imam Abu Hanifa, even though as a hadith narrator Abu Muti al-Balkhi was criticized. I don't see a major issue with that, and that's why scholars like Abu Layth al-Samarqandi did do a commentary on this, and he's one of the relatively early imams of the madhab. The Alim Muta'allim is by Abu Qatil al-Samarqandi. Not much is known about him, but there's no reason to really doubt whether he actually is accurately transmitting the Q&A format of the book from Abu Hanifa, at least maybe not the verbatim accurately, like the literal actual words of Abu Hanifa, but the general mafhum. There's no real reason to deny. That's why Ibn Furak has written commentaries and affirming the content of it. And as for the Kitab al-Athar, some scholars suggest that was actually a book of Imam Abu Hanifa transmitted by his students, whereas most muhaddithin of the opinion that these are books of his students, not actually Imam Abu Hanifa's own book. Allah knows best. And then we moved on to this Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, and we highlighted that Imam Abu Yusuf's major impact on the madhab was him teaching after Imam Abu Hanifa passing away, and by his teaching the spread of the madhab happened by that route. Qadha, which is a major impact of the madhab, where he became the chief judge. You could appoint judges, and he seems to appoint a lot of judges that were Hanafi, so therefore the madhab spread far and wide. And number 3 was Tadween, where he wrote books highlighting the Hanafi position. Although these books were not huge, but they did have a lot of impact in defending the Imam Abu Hanifa, his teachers' opinions, and spreading them. And on the other hand, Imam Muhammad, who was both of their students, he had much more impact in terms of tadweed in the books that he wrote, and that became the foundation of the madhab of Zahiri riwayah. He also learned from Imam Malik, which allowed him to bring that experience and that engagement into the madhab as well. He wrote other books as well, of course, that we mentioned. And then he taught. He taught for a number of years. So he started at the age of 20 and he taught for a number of years. Engaged with people like Shafi'i, who was younger than him. And then lastly, he became a qadi as well. So even that experience he brought onto the table. So with all of that experiences they brought and the effort they made, this is where the of why the madhab was so successful in its early years, and continue to be into our day to day, so successful, because we have this, a very profound, elaborate defense and presentation of the position of Abu Hanifa very early on. So when you become a Hanafi, you have this rich tradition which goes right back to the early period to work off, rather than having to wait 200-300 years for someone to come and do some elaborate effort. It starts off right from the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. So that kind of wraps us up for our session today, inshallah. And the next session we'll look at the Taqsim al-Masail in the Hanafi madhab. Assalamu alaikum.